Imagine it happens tonight. No warning, no disaster, no explanation. 7 billion people gone. The lights are still on. The cars are still running. A train somewhere in Germany is still moving toward a station no one will arrive at. A phone is ringing in an empty kitchen. A traffic light is cycling through green, yellow, red for no one. The world we built is still humming, but empty. This isn't a thought experiment. Researchers, ecologists, and atmospheric scientists have spent decades modeling exactly this scenario. There's even a book about it, Alan Weisman's The World Without Us, which spent years being studied and debated by scientists across multiple disciplines. What they found tells us something important, not just about nature, but about our place in it. Here's what the science says happens next. Day 1. Power grids begin failing within hours. Coal plants burn through their remaining fuel and shut down. Nuclear plants without operators to manage their cooling systems trigger automatic emergency shutdowns. The process isn't instantaneous. Different regions go dark at different rates, but by the end of the first week, the entire planet is dark. No city lights, no street lamps, no screens. And for the first time in over a century, you could stand anywhere on Earth at night, in the middle of London, in downtown Shanghai, in New York City, and see the Milky Way in full. Wildlife begins moving into cities almost immediately. Within days, animals are occupying streets, parks, and infrastructure that was always theirs before we arrived. This isn't surprising. Urban wildlife has been present in every major city for decades, held back only by human activity. Remove the activity, and the animals that were already there simply expand. Domesticated dogs form feral packs. Without human selection pressure, generations of controlled breeding begin slowly unwinding. They start returning towards something older. 1 month, the rivers run dark. Centuries of industrial and agricultural contamination, chemical runoff, pharmaceutical residue, untreated sewage, all of it flushing through the waterways at once now the treatment plants have shut down. It looks at this stage like permanent damage, but rivers are living systems, and living systems respond. Microbial and biological processes that humans had been interrupting for generations began operating without interference. Bacteria break down organic pollutants, sediment settles, the water clears slowly, starting from the headwaters and working downstream. By month 3, salmon are returning to rivers they haven't used in over 100 years, not because anyone restocked them, because the water is finally clean enough. Year 1. Vegetation is breaking through urban infrastructure in every city on Earth. Grass exploits hairline cracks in asphalt and widens them. Tree roots undermine building foundations. Vines work their way up facades and into window gaps. This process was already happening before. City maintenance crews spend enormous resources fighting it every year. Remove those crews, and the process accelerates rapidly. By the end of year 1, green is visibly winning in every major city on the planet. When concrete and biology compete without human maintenance, biology wins. It always wins. It just needs time. Year 10. We already know what happens at this stage because we have a documented real-world example. In 1986, a nuclear reactor exploded near the city of Pripyat in Ukraine. The surrounding area was evacuated. Scientists predicted a radioactive dead zone that would take centuries to recover. What they got instead, within a decade, was one of the most biodiverse wildlife areas in all of Europe. Wolves, bears, lynx, Przewalski's horses, European bison, over 300 species of birds, all thriving in and around the abandoned city and the contaminated forest. Not despite the radiation, but because the single most destructive force for wildlife on the planet had been removed. That force wasn't the explosion, it was human presence. Scaled that across the entire planet simultaneously, and that is year 10 without us. Large predator populations recovering on every continent. In Africa, elephant herds spreading beyond the boundaries of the reserves they were compressed into for decades. In Asia, tiger populations pushing back into river deltas and forest corridors they abandoned centuries ago. In the oceans, whale populations returning toward pre-industrial levels, freed from the sonar disruption of shipping lanes and the entanglement of ghost fishing gear. The world's ecosystems stabilizing in ways that haven't been possible for a very long time. Year 25. Structural failure begins in earnest in the cities. The first buildings to go are not the famous landmarks. They tend to be well built. The first to go are the anonymous post-war towers, the ones constructed cheaply during the building booms of the 1960s and 70s, with poorly mixed concrete and rebar that was already beginning to corrode before the buildings opened. Water infiltrates the existing cracks, freezes in winter, expands, widens the fractures. The process repeats every cold season. Eventually, a wall panel fails, then a floor slab. Then the load path through the structure is compromised and the building comes down, slowly, incrementally, in sections, not in a single dramatic collapse. The skylines of the great cities don't fall. They dissolve, building by building, over decades. There is no longer a meaningful boundary between Central Park and the forest growing through Midtown Manhattan. They have become one continuous ecological system. Year 50. The Amazon basin is regenerating. This matters more than almost anything else on this list, because the Amazon isn't just a forest. It's a system that generates its own rainfall, regulates regional temperature, and supports more species than any other ecosystem on land. Humans spent a century degrading it. Seeds that had been lying dormant in damaged soil for decades are germinating now that the disturbance has stopped. Pioneer tree species move in first, stabilizing the ground and building the soil conditions that allow slower, larger species to follow. The canopy closes, humidity rises, rain patterns that deforestation had disrupted begin recovering. The Amazon starts breathing again. In the oceans, coral reef systems that were in severe decline are rebuilding. New heat-tolerant coral species, which emerged as an evolutionary adaptation to warming water temperatures, are spreading into the gaps left by mass bleaching events. Without agricultural runoff feeding algae blooms that smother the reef, without the mechanical destruction of bottom trawling, the reef structure has room to re-establish. Ocean biodiversity begins recovery at depths and regions that have been functionally dead within living memory. Year 100. Consider Paris. The Eiffel Tower is still standing. Iron lasts longer than steel-reinforced concrete, and the open lattice design distributes structural load efficiently enough to survive without maintenance for at least this long. But the lower two-thirds of the tower are now inside a dense urban forest growing through what used to be the Champs-Élysées. The Seine has broken through its stone embankments. Those embankments required constant maintenance to hold, and carved new channels through the old arrondissements. The Haussmann limestone buildings of the left bank, built from thick stone designed to last centuries, are still mostly intact. They're covered in moss and ivy, their interiors colonized by birds, bats, and ferns. The Louvre courtyard has deer in it. The metro tunnels have otters. The river is clean. It smells the way rivers smelled before we built anything near them. That is 100 years. One human lifetime. The Earth doesn't need geological time to recover from us. It doesn't need 1,000,000 years or even 10,000. It needs a century. The systems we disrupted, atmospheric, biological, hydrological, they don't require our help to repair themselves. They require only our absence. The planet we spent generations reshaping takes itself back through the ordinary, uninterrupted operational processes that were running long before we arrived and will continue long after we were gone. Which raises a straightforward question. Not what happens to Earth if we disappear. We've just answered that in some detail. The question is, what happens to Earth while we're still here? What the science of our absence tells us about the impact of our presence. And what, if anything, we decide to do with that information.